Hi everyone, welcome to Talk Easy. Today, Catherine and Mike will explain how to use comparatives like taller and superlatives like the tallest. Learn how to talk about differences and extremes easily. Let's jump in.
Welcome to this deep dive. We're going to be looking at comparatives and superlatives today. You know those little words that can really make your sentences pop or totally mess you up? Have you ever noticed how some people just have this way with words,
Yeah.
They can make these really subtle points or paint these amazing pictures with their descriptions.
Yeah.
Well, I bet they've mastered comparatives and superlatives.
It's true. Comparatives and superlatives are like a secret weapon for language. When you use them right, they add so much depth and flavor to what you're saying. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can express really subtle differences, create emphasis, and make your words really come alive.
So no more boring sentences for us, right?
Exactly.
Let's start with the basics. What are comparatives?
Okay, so comparatives, they help us compare two things. Simple as that.
Uh-huh.
They tell us how one thing is bigger, smaller, better, worse, faster, slower. You get the idea than the other. It's like using a scale to weigh two things.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
But how do we actually form these comparatives? What are the rules?
All right. For short adjectives, the ones with just one syllable usually just add "er" to the end. Like tall becomes taller, smart becomes smarter. Easy peasy.
Okay, got it. But what about longer words?
Ah, good question.
Like if I wanted to say something is more ridiculous than something else, what would I do?
For longer adjectives, those with two or more syllables, we usually use more or less before the adjective. So ridiculous becomes more ridiculous or less ridiculous. It depends on what you're trying to say, of course.
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling there are some exceptions, aren't there?
Of course. English wouldn't be English without its exceptions.
Right.
We have a few irregular comparatives, the rebels that don't follow the rules. Like,
Yeah.
good doesn't become gooder, it becomes better.
Right.
And bad becomes worse.
Ugh, those irregulars. Always
They-
breaking the rule.
They like to keep us on our toes.
All right, so we've talked about forming comparatives. Now, what about superlatives? They seem a bit more, I don't know, intense.
Superlatives, yeah, they're all about taking things to the extreme. They express the highest or lowest degree of equality within a group. Like if you're picking the winner of a competition.
Okay, so like the tallest building in the city or the most delicious pizza you've ever had, those are superlatives.
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
And just like with comparatives, how we form superlatives depends on the number of syllables in the adjective. If it's a one-syllable adjective, we add est to the end. Tall becomes tallest. Fast becomes fastest. You with me?
Yeah, so it's the same as comparatives, just with est instead of er.
You got it.
And what about those longer words again? Do we use more and less, like with comparatives?
Not quite. For the longer adjectives, we use most or least before them.
Okay.
So you get most beautiful, least interesting, most delicious, and so on.
Wow, it's amazing how just adding a little ending to a word can completely change its meaning.
Right. Language is pretty cool that way.
It is. So are there any exceptions to these superlative rules? I'm sensing a pattern here.
Huh. You're catching on. Of course, we have our rule-breaking irregulars again. Like good becomes best and bad becomes worst.
Those irregulars. Always up to something.
It-
Okay, so now we know how to form both comparatives and superlatives, but how do we know when to use which one?
Good question. The main difference is in how many things you're comparing. Comparatives are just for two things, but superlatives are for three or more.
Okay.
It's like a tournament. Comparatives are the early rounds where two players compete.
Right.
Superlatives are the championship where the very best comes out on top.
Okay, I like that. So if I'm comparing my cooking to yours, it'd be a comparative like, my pasta is better than yours. But if we're talking about the best pasta in the entire city, that's where the superlative best comes in.
You got it. You're a natural at this.
Okay, great. So the rules seem pretty straightforward, but I have a feeling there are some common mistakes people make when it comes to comparatives and superlatives.
No, absolutely. Even people who speak English really well mess these up sometimes. And it's funny. Some of these mistakes are so common they've actually become accepted in some places or when people are just talking casually.
Interesting.
So let's talk about the big ones, the mistakes everyone should watch out for. One trap is using double comparatives or double superlatives. This is when you use both the "erist" ending and more most with the same adjective, like saying more taller or most happiest.
Yeah, that sounds wrong.
It is.
It's like putting way too much salt in your food.
That's a great way to put it. You only need one marker to show the comparison or superlative.
Right, no double dipping. So what other grammatical no-nos are out there?
Another common mistake is using comparatives or superlatives with words that are already absolute, they can't be more or less of what they are.
Absolute words. What do you mean?
Words like unique, perfect, or impossible. Those words describe things that are either true or not. You can't be more unique or most unique.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Like a circle can't be more circular.
Exactly. You might hear people say these things when they're just talking, but it's not grammatically correct, especially when you're writing something formal.
Good to know. So we've got the double comparatives and superlatives and these absolute words to watch out for. Are there any other grammar monsters lurking out there waiting to trip us up?
Just one more big one to keep in mind. People often forget to use the before superlatives. You wouldn't say he is tallest person in the room. It should be he is the tallest person in the room.
You know, I think I've heard people make that mistake before. It always sounded a bit off, but I could never figure out why.
It's a little detail, but it's important for making your sentence sound right.
Got it. So it's like a tiny but mighty ingredient in our grammar recipe.
Exactly.
Well, I have to say, I'm already feeling more confident about my comparatives and superlatives, but is there anything else that can help us really master these, besides just memorizing the rules?
There is. One of the most important things about comparatives and superlatives is understanding that they're not just about rules. It's about using language in a smart way to create a certain effect.
Ooh, tell me more.
So, for example, one thing that people often overlook is context. The way you use comparatives and superlatives can change depending on the situation. You might use a more formal tone when you're at work compared to when you're hanging out with friends.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'd probably use more playful comparisons when I'm telling a story to friends, but if I'm giving a presentation at work, I'd be more careful and precise with my words.
You got it. And that's where the real art of language comes in. It's about understanding those subtle differences and choosing the right words for the right moment.
So it's not just about being grammatically correct, it's about using language with a purpose. I like that. What other things should we keep in mind when we're making comparisons?
Another important thing to consider is the level of formality, like you just mentioned. Comparatives and superlatives can range from very casual to quite formal, depending on the situation.
I see what you mean. Like if I'm just talking to my friends, I might say, this movie is way funnier than the one we saw last week. But if I'm writing a review for a magazine, I'd probably say something like, this film is a comedic masterpiece, surpassing all others in its genre.
Exactly. Being aware of these subtle shifts in tone can make a big difference in how your message comes across.
It's like dressing for the occasion. You wouldn't wear a tuxedo to a barbecue, and you wouldn't use slang in a job interview.
Perfect analogy. It's all about adapting your language to fit the context.
Okay, context and formality, got it. Any other pro tips you can share?
One last thing to think about is the rhythm and flow of your sentences. Comparatives and superlatives can add energy and excitement to what you're saying, but you have to use them in a way that sounds natural and engaging. You wouldn't want to overload your sentences with too many comparatives or superlatives. It would sound clunky and repetitive.
Right. Too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. It's like adding spices to your food. A little bit can make it delicious, but too much can ruin it.
Exactly. It's all about finding the right balance.
Okay. Context, formality, and rhythm and flow. Great tips. I feel like I'm getting a masterclass in comparatives and superlatives here.
Yeah.
But before we move on, are there any other common pitfalls we should be aware of? I'm ready to tackle any grammatical challenges.
There are a few more things we should cover. One mistake that even careful speakers make is using comparatives or superlatives with adjectives that can't be intensified or compared.
What are those called again?
They're called non-gradable adjectives, like pregnant, dead, or married.
Ah, yeah. Those words describe states that are either true or false. You can't be more pregnant or most dead.
Right. It's like saying a light switch is more on or most off.
Yeah.
There is or it isn't.
I see. So it's another one of those quirky English rules.
It is. But the more you learn about these little details, the better you'll become at using comparatives and superlatives effectively.
Okay, good to know. It seems like there's a lot more to comparatives and superlatives than I thought.
There definitely is. And you know what? In the next part of this deep dive, we're going to explore even more advanced concepts and techniques that can really take your skills to the next level.
Awesome. I'm ready to keep learning and expanding my grammar horizons.
Great! I'm excited to share more insights with you. Welcome back. Ready to jump into some of those more advanced concepts?
You bet. I'm feeling like a grammar guru in training, ready for the next level.
Awesome. One really cool thing about comparatives and superlatives is how much history and culture is tied up in them. Did you know some irregular forms, like better and worse, go all the way back to Old English?
Wow, really? I never thought about that. I just thought they were always part of English.
It's amazing how language changes over time. These irregular forms are like little time capsules, giving us glimpses into the past.
Yeah.
For example, worse comes from an Old English word werse, and it meant more bad or even more evil.
So even simple words like worse have all this history behind them. That's fascinating.
Exactly. Knowing this history can help us understand how we use these words today.
Yeah.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit. Have you ever noticed how authors use comparatives and superlatives to paint vivid pictures and create emotions?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
I love fantasy novels. And I'm always amazed at how authors make you feel like you're in another world.
Hmm.
I bet comparatives and superlatives help with that.
They do. Like imagine a scene where a writer's describing a dragon.
Okay.
Instead of just saying the dragon was big, they might say, the dragon was larger than any mountain, its scales shimmering brighter than 1,000 suns.
Wow, that's way more exciting.
Right. Comparatives and superlatives give you a sense of scale and make things come alive.
Yeah, they do. I bet they're important in other types of writing, too.
Oh,
Like mysteries.
absolutely.
A writer could use a clever comparative to hint at a clue, or maybe even mislead the reader.
You're right. Comparatives and superlatives can build suspense, foreshadow events, or even reveal a character's true intentions.
They're like secret weapons for writers.
They are. Okay, now let's think about advertising. Have you noticed how marketers use comparatives and superlatives to try and get us to buy things?
Oh yeah, all the time. Every commercial's like the best, the fastest, the most delicious.
Exactly.
It's a classic marketing move.
It is. Advertisers want to make you feel like their product is better than all the others.
And sometimes it works, especially when I see ads online. You know, the most comfortable shoes ever, or something like that.
They know how to appeal to our desires, make us want the best, the most amazing thing.
So they're using grammar to influence our choices. It's pretty sneaky.
You could say that. It shows how powerful language can be.
It does. Okay, so we've talked about authors and advertisers. What other fields use comparatives and superlatives in interesting ways?
Let's talk about politics.
Okay.
Have you ever noticed how politicians use these to shape people's opinions?
Oh, for sure. Every speech is full of the best policies, the worst economic conditions, the strongest leadership.
They're masters of persuasion. They use these words to create a sense of urgency, highlight differences between themselves and their opponents, and ultimately win votes.
So it's not just about giving information, it's about using language to influence people.
That's right. And understanding how this works can help us be more critical thinkers.
Yeah, like we can decode their speeches and see what they're really saying.
Exactly. And that's an important skill to have.
Okay, so I'm really starting to see how versatile and powerful comparatives and superlatives are. We've seen them in literature, advertising, and now politics.
And there's even more to explore. These are woven into the fabric of how we communicate, shaping our thoughts, and making our language richer.
I'm starting to notice them everywhere.
That's great. The more you learn about language, the more you see it working in the world around you.
Okay, before we get too deep into that, let's talk about some specific constructions or phrases that are really useful.
Good idea. One that people often forget about is the as structure. This one shows how two things are equal.
Oh, like as strong as an ox or as light as a feather.
Perfect examples. It can be used to compare both good and bad things. This coffee is as strong as espresso, or this traffic is as bad as rush hour.
Yeah, that's helpful for making really clear comparisons.
It is. Another cool one is the structure.
Let's out.
This one shows how two things change together. Like, the more you practice, the better you'll become, or the higher you climb, the colder it gets.
Oh, I like that. It shows how one thing affects the other.
Right. And you can use this with all sorts of adjectives and verbs to express different ideas.
Okay, as, and the. Got it. Any other secret grammar tips you can share?
One last thing. Pay attention to how these are used in different types of writing and speaking. The tone and style of your comparisons can change depending on whether you're writing a formal essay, a casual email, or even a poem.
Yeah, that makes sense. A poet might use more imaginative language than a scientist writing a report.
Exactly. A poet might say, her eyes were as bright as a summer sky, while a scientist might say, the temperature increased by 10 degrees Celsius.
So it's not just knowing the rules, it's knowing how to use them in different situations.
Exactly. And the more you read and listen to different types of language, the better you'll understand this.
Wow. I'm really starting to appreciate all the subtleties of comparatives and superlatives now.
I'm glad to hear that. Now, to really solidify everything, in the last part of this deep dive, we'll do some hands-on exercises.
Sounds good. I'm excited to put all this knowledge to work. Welcome back for the final part of our deep dive into comparatives and superlatives. We've covered a lot of ground, haven't we?
We have history, strategy, special constructions.
Now it's time to put it all into practice.
Right. Are you ready for some exercises?
You bet I am.
All right. Let's start with a classic. Sentence rewrites. I give you a sentence, you make it better with a comparative or superlative. Make it shine.
Sounds fun. Okay, hit me.
Here's one. The cat sat on the mat.
Okay. Let me see. How about the cat, more content than a king on his throne, stretched out on the softest mat in the house?
Perfect. You took a boring sentence and made it come alive. You gave the cat personality, added details.
It's amazing how a few little changes can make such a difference.
They really can. Ready for another one?
Absolutely.
Okay. This time, I give you a scenario, and you make a sentence with a comparative or superlative that fits.
Bring it on.
Imagine a stunning sunset over the ocean. What comes to mind?
The sky blazed with colors more vibrant than any artist's palette, as the sun dipped below the horizon in a spectacle more magnificent than any firework display.
Wow, that's beautiful. You captured the scene perfectly. You used superlatives to show the intensity and grandeur of the sunset.
I'm starting to feel like I can do this.
You absolutely can. Okay, let's try one last exercise. This one's a bit more analytical. Ready?
Hit me with it.
I'm going to give you a sentence with a comparative or superlative. Your job is to identify it, analyze it, and tell me why the speaker or writer might have used it that way.
Ooh, a grammar puzzle.
Exactly. Here it is. The older I get, the more I realize the importance of living in the present moment.
Okay, let me think. Well, first of all, I see that the structure, which shows us two things are connected.
Good.
In this case, it's the person's age and what they're realizing about living in the moment.
Right. What else do you see?
Well, older, that's the comparative, describing the speaker's age. And then there's most, the superlative, to emphasize how important that realization is.
You nailed it. The speaker is using these forms to highlight the change in their thinking over time.
I never realized how much thought goes into choosing the right comparative or superlative. It's not just about the rules, it's about getting your meaning across in a powerful way.
Exactly. And that's what makes language so cool. It's this ever-changing tool that lets us shape our thoughts, express our feelings, and connect with others.
I have to say, this deep dive has really opened my eyes to the world of comparatives and superlatives.
I'm so glad to hear that. And remember, learning about language is a journey. It never really ends. There's always something new to discover.
I'm definitely going to keep practicing and experimenting with these in my own writing and speaking.
That's the spirit. I can't wait to see what you come up with.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into comparatives and superlatives. We hope you've learned something new and are feeling inspired to use these forms to spice up your own communication.
Until next time.
Happy comparing.